didn't die that day, no, it didn't die that day. I sang a song of silence on the day I heard the news. Sometimes you don't know what you have until you have to lose. Lose as we refuse to be, that's why we like to say the spirit of Norfolk didn't die that day.
Generally speaking, why the bagpipes? Like when did that start? Do you remember the first time you heard bagpipes and what that was like? Or is this something that happened so early in your life you don't remember it now?
No, it definitely happened later, though I have a hard time pinpointing when it was that I heard them and thought to myself, that's something I need to do. I'd say, I probably heard them in passing growing up a bit. I didn't come from a family that necessarily listened to Scottish music or traditional music. There's a lot of music in the house, but not a lot of that kind. But I started going to, as a sort of late teenager and into adulthood, going to things like Renaissance festivals.
Oh, sure, yeah.
And that was probably the first time I was exposed to them being played kind of up close as a solo instrument. And started to get really interested in them from that standpoint.
Do you remember if it was highland bagpipes, some kind of small pipes, reconstruction of medieval bagpipes, like what kind of bagpipes it was you were hearing?
The first ones I saw were definitely highland bagpipes. In fact, I remember I don't know if this is the first ones I heard, but the ones that stuck with me and I think were the trigger was seeing the Rogues with E.J. Jones.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Who used to play at the Maryland Renaissance Festival quite frequently, and it was definitely, they had two highland pipers. It was two highland pipers, two drummers, and it was just a really kind of a something that really stuck with me. Although I do remember also seeing at sort of Celtic festivals and Irish festivals, seeing uilleann pipes.
Oh, sure.
And in fact, I'd say that was actually when I first started looking into playing. I was looking into playing uilleann pipes because I think that's what initially caught me.
Understandable, yeah. What a sound, yeah.
Yeah, but was hit by as a young adult who at the time was finishing up school. So this, I guess if we're actually sort of time stamping this, I was, say early 20s. Ran into the issue of obviously the cost of uilleann pipes.
Yeah.
Being significantly higher. And at the time, at least, finding any kind of an instructor in the U.S. Was prohibitive because we didn't really have Zoom or any kind of sort of online lessons at the time. I was lucky enough that Bob Dunsire's forums existed for people who are familiar with those. And so I was able to locate people who were in the know, and there were lists of teachers on there, but nobody was giving uilleann pipe lessons anywhere in my region. So
yeah,
I won't say because I know that a lot of the people who listen to this are big lovers of the highland pipes, and so am I. I won't say highland pipes were my second choice, but in some ways they were just by default.
You did kind of settle, didn't you?
Yeah.
I don't think you need to be too worried about that. I suspect it's a really common experience, either that we come to bagpipes in general via the sound of uilleann pipes, or that once we've started piping via whatever other pipes, we encounter uilleann pipes and go, wait, what? Like,
yeah,
uilleann pipes are kind of the rock star in so many ways for many of us, for sure.
Yeah.
In fact, I even heard Ross Ainsley not too long ago say that those are the best bagpipes. So
well,
there you go. If he said it, there must be something to it.
That's right.
So then going to Highland Pipes, have you always been doing solo stuff and like small groups? Did you ever play at Ren fairs, or did you go the competitive Highland piping route for a while, or are you still? Like, how did that take shape?
Yeah, it's an interesting road because I was not interested when I got into pipes in competing on either the solo or in a pipe band circuit.
Yeah. By the way, not to like hang on to the thread, but What is that like? Because I personally I came into it very, very young, so I'm always curious for people who came into it a little later in life, so you have memories of it. What was it like to realize that there are bagpipe competitions? Like, did that make sense right away, or was that weird?
It was, I would say, weird, and I ran into them once I started really taking notice
Mm-hmm.
of pipes. I started going to Highland games and ran
Mm-hmm.
into competitions there. But it was definitely yeah, I'd say that my previous experience before that was seeing pipes, either solo players at places like the Renaissance Festival, or seeing marching pipe bands
Sure,
in
yeah.
parades and things like that. I was not aware until I really started to dive into the culture that competition existed.
Mm.
Um, but fairly quickly got into that. So it was definitely unusual, and it was a while even after that, even after I got a teacher, before I really understood what competitive piping meant, like
Mm.
what was involved in it.
I'm
Um,
I'm still not sure I totally understand, honestly.
yeah,
I go out there and do my best, but I have to tell them like, I hope I'm doing this right, you know?
yeah. So I started out taking lessons with not really any clear goal other than I want to play this instrument.
Yeah.
The what I tell people when they ask me is, because this is sort of speaks a little bit to my personalities, was I found out that bagpipes were a strange instrument that was difficult to play, difficult to master, and that there was almost no good place to play them. And I thought to myself, that's something I've got to do.
That's for me.
Yeah. Um,
Some kind of self-destructive turn in your personality or something there, huh? Like,
yeah,
I
it's
will
weird and
suffer then.
difficult. Um, so I started taking lessons without a real clear goal, and because I told my instructor I didn't really want to play in a pipe band. She worked with me on more kind of solo tunes. She did teach me sort of mass bands tunes, as
Mhm.
everybody, so that you can play in mass bands when you're at Highland games or what have you. Um, but at first, that was all I really did. And then I did start competing solo once I got to that level, because I needed something to do with them. I think I ran into that point where it's like, well,
Yeah.
okay, I'm learning these and I'm enjoying that. Now what? Other than sitting in my little closet
Yeah.
practicing every day. So I did start going to solo competitions, and I didn't I didn't love it, but I did it, and it was a good chance to kind of get to meet other pipers and to get a little more involved in the culture. So I
Mhm.
stuck with that for a while.
And
Um,
and I don't, and again, hold on to the thread. I don't want to throw you
yeah,
off, but I am curious about that experience where what like was it ever lonely? Like, did you ever, and I don't mean this like in a mean way, but I mean, did you ever feel like, because I wonder if this is just my impression, it's wrong because of the way that I came into piping, but did you ever feel like everybody else on the field was going back to a band tent after their solo and you were like the only one there who didn't have a flag kind of thing?
yeah. I think when I first started competing solo, I still wasn't really aware of pipe bands in that way,
I
and
see.
so I did feel lonely. Yeah, definitely, because I mean, especially there were games where my instructor couldn't even be there. And
Mm,
so I was at that point, I was married, so my partner would come,
mm-hmm.
but, but not all the time. And so there were times where I would show up, and of course I'm coming into this as a grade 4 lowly solo competitor. So I'm playing at like 8 in the morning.
Yeah, yeah,
And,
you're getting the worst end of every possible stick. Yeah.
yeah, so I would come and I would play my, 3 to 5 minutes of music, and then put my pipes away and then say, okay, do I stick around? Do I go home? What
Yeah.
I do, I'm just here on my own. So it was definitely lonely at times. I had some good experiences where I would chat to people, and then I remember one particular case. Uh, so I guess backing up a little bit, I do have some Scottish ancestry, and I
Mm-hmm.
did know sort of I'm using air quotes, who my clan was, the clan
Mm-hmm.
name. But I didn't. It was not like a big thing in my family. So I had a good experience where I was chatting to somebody from my clan, and they invited me to just hang out with them.
Mm.
And I ended up. not playing pipes, but just marching with them in the kind of clan parade and then
Oh, sure.
standing around. So I had some good experiences meeting people, which I think I may not have had if I'd had a band tent to go back to, or if I'd had friends and family there. So I definitely got to meet people as a result of that being lonely. But yeah, definitely not being aware of the band culture, and not knowing anybody, was strange at first.
You must love it though, right? Like
Yeah.
there's part of me that's like trying to relive this in my imagination with you, and it's like, well, then what's the motivation? And it must be the playing the music, and that's not a bad motivation either.
Yeah, it was definitely always about the music for me.
Yeah.
And jumping ahead, not trying to sort of give away the plot, but I have played with bands. I did end up playing with a competitive band for several years. Also, again, as a way just to have something good to do with it, and have made some great friends out of that. In fact, I only recently, just this season, have stepped down from playing with a competitive band to focus on other kinds of music because I've just got too many musical projects. But we can talk about that later. But so I did eventually get into the band culture and understood the hanging out in the band tent and kind of having that camaraderie. And I've been through that process. And I would say, unless you know people, it's definitely preferable to have that band community versus just being a solo player who doesn't know anybody. But it's always more fun, obviously, being at those games if you know people and you can hang out and talk to them.
Yeah. Yeah, there's just a lot of time in between events, and so having having folks to chat with and a lawn chair to go back to, that can make a difference. Yeah. So then, like, how long did you run solo before you started hopping into a band?
So it was interesting, actually. So about, looking at the date here, about 14 years ago, I moved from one city to another for my wife's job, and stopped taking lessons initially, and kind of set down the pipes for a while because I was still practicing when I first got there, but I no longer even had that connection of weekly lessons.
Yeah.
And I made what I now recognize as a mistake of not immediately jumping into either finding a new teacher or finding a band or finding some motivation for doing it. So I ended up kind of setting the pipes down for a few years. And was still playing other music, other instruments, but got to the point where I wanted to pick up the pipes again, and I needed a motivation. And so that's when I ended up sort of reaching out to a local band and going out to their practices and kind of starting to get a feel for what that was like, having never been in it before. And it was definitely daunting at first because it was one of these bands that had been around for a very long time. And a lot of people had been in it for a very long time. And so they were very welcoming, but at the same time, you're walking into somebody else's family and trying to find your place in it. So that was definitely an experience.
Yeah, that's something I've heard come up before. As I think that's a somewhat common experience for people first coming into bands, especially like you say, that have been long established. It's not necessarily that anybody there is like mean or anything like that. Hopefully that's never the case, right? But it's like you recognize that, like, oh yeah, some of these people are like genuinely directly related, and even those who aren't, they've been doing this for decades, and here am I. But though at the same time, what band isn't excited to get a new player who already knows what they're doing? So you got to imagine there's some element of like, hey, new kid on the block, all right, like pretty cool to have an implant,
Yeah. I think there's always that excitement. Now, I was sort of in a strange place where I was coming back a bit cold, and I was, my pipes needed some maintenance, and I was a lot of practice. But compared to the folks I had coming in taking lessons every week who were
absolutely
still on the practice chanter, I was, I could read the music. I was familiar with some of the tunes, so it was a little bit easier to get involved. But it also helped that at that time, that band has become more competitive since, but at the time they were mainly more of a parade band.
I see.
And so they were working more on that kind of parade and mass bands music. And so I think that was a little bit And it was a big band too, so it was kind of easier to slip in and hide a little bit. But it's definitely daunting initially.
Yeah. So then, did you stick with them for a real long time? And is that the band you recently stepped down from, or have you hopped bands a bit?
I have hot bands, although and it was not initially my plan. It was, as I'm sure a lot of people have experienced, it was COVID
Oh,
that did
sure.
it. So obviously everything shut down. Nobody was practicing, and they were doing a few kind of Zoom practice chanter sessions, and I went to a few of those, but it wasn't really the same. I hadn't really been with the band that long when everything shut down, so I didn't have that kind of community connection to them yet, and so I kind of just faded away over as a lot of people did. I know a lot of bands were hit really hard.
Yeah.
And then a couple of the members of that band, because again, that band at the time still wasn't really a competitive band. A couple of the members of that band, sort of towards the tail end when things were starting to open up, decided they wanted to split off and form a really dedicated, hardcore competitive band. And one of them reached out to me, and I went out to their practices, and so I came into that band from the beginning, and that was the band that I stayed with until just recently.
And did they try to do, did they try to play into a grade level right from the beginning, like send in some tapes kind of thing? Or did they start in grade 4 and work their way up? Or how's that been approached?
Yeah, so they went into grade 4, although we did record videos and try and get a slightly higher grade. But I think because we had zero history, we just had kind of our practice videos and things like that. We did go into grade 4, but it was definitely it is still a motivation for that band to really push and keep trying to advance that band. It was also a very interesting experience. I don't think a lot of people have necessarily had in pipe bands, of coming into a band that is brand new, that's starting up from scratch.
Yeah.
With a really, really dedicated mindset. And I was, for thinking in like tech terms of like, I'm employee number 1 or 2. So I was band member number 4 of that band. So when we first started having practices, it was like just really a couple of people standing around playing. We had one drummer and 3 pipers, 4 pipers, and built from there, from pulling in from the community and reaching out to people, and it was a very interesting experience. So coming in, where the initial practices were just say one drummer and 3 pipers, and we just were really kind of dedicated to this purpose. Like we started out learning competition sets, and that we didn't really focus on mass bands tunes, or we didn't have any goal. We actually wanted to strategically avoid playing parades if we could. It was a very focused experience. And it was also interesting, just starting something from scratch like that.
Kind of gathering the story together like scattered straws here. I do kind of want to pull in kind of a concurrent timeline here as well regarding other music. You mentioned that you played some other music, like when you put your pipes down and stuff too. Like, what other music? You mentioned there was music in the house when you were a kid. What about playing music in general? Where did that start? Old lady giving you piano lessons down the street, or school band? What's all the rest of your musical world looking like?
Yeah. So my first real experience was in elementary school. There was kind of an after-school orchestra program, and I learned a little bit of violin and cello through that, just kind of like learning the basics. But pretty early on, I switched to the guitar because I'd always loved a wide variety of rock music, and I had friends and family who were into it. So I got a hold of a really cheap acoustic guitar and started learning that. Probably around 8, 9, something like that. And that was my main instrument for a very, very long time. So, I mean, so I played in through middle school and into high school, I played in all kinds of like punk bands and really bad teenage garage bands and those kinds of things. And that was pretty much what I did. I sang punk songs and played guitar.
I'm already seeing how some things come together later, so it's good. These are important experiences that will echo through the coming decades, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So then, what was that like? You pick up the pipes. While you were more focused on playing your pipes, like initially learning and stuff like that, was the guitar taking its turn gathering dust? And then when the pipes got put down for a bit, guitar comes back out, or is it kind of like everything all the time?
As much as possible, it was everything all the time, because that tends to be how I do things. But obviously, that doesn't work as well as we'd like it to. So I'd say the pipes took precedence for quite a while, and I didn't really touch the guitar that much. I was also picking up other instruments at the same time, just through happenstance. I acquired a banjo shortly around that same time. I'd say shortly before I started picking up the pipes, and plunked away at that, though it wasn't very good, and wasn't really trying to be very good. But I'd say pipes took precedence for a number of years. It was kind of a primary instrument.
And what did, like, the family that you had around you when you first started playing pipes, like, what was the reaction? Also, did your partner of today know you pre-piping, and did they have to get over that, or was that already part of the package when you met?
Yeah, so the first part first, the family, they were actually very supportive. I mean, I was out on my own, so they didn't have to deal with the noise.
They didn't have to do it. They just said good luck to the neighbors.
Yeah, and they were very supportive. They've always been very supportive of doing different artistic endeavors. So, like, once I got to the point where I was willing to play in front of people, I definitely played for them, and they enjoyed it. My partner and I were together, and we were living together by that point. She was also very supportive of it. Had to deal with the noise, certainly, but
Yeah.
she's also very supportive of our artistic endeavors, and is willing to put up. She knows that there's going to be a certain pain period to learning. So I did what I could. We had a second bedroom that had been divided by previous occupants into two rooms, a bigger one and a smaller room. I think the back one was sort of a walk-in closet size. And I turned that into my practice space, and I, stapled foam to the walls and did whatever I could to kind of mute things. But you could hear it everywhere, obviously.
Yeah. One does what one can, but it never is enough, is it?
Yeah.
Yeah. And like, maybe this is too nitty gritty a detail, but I think it's such a shared experience. I do wonder how many people will be laughing and slapping their knees like me too, What was it like? How long of a practice session could you do in a closet before you were just, soaking the pipes in sweat and needing some fresh air?
Yeah, it was, those were probably, like, at the time, 10 to 15-minute practices on the pipes. And
Yeah.
also, an experience that I'm sure a lot of people will have, especially in those early days. I probably spent, 10 of those 15 minutes fighting with tuning, or running into some pipe maintenance issue or something like that. So there were plenty of practices I spent just fighting with the pipes. I like to say that it's a good thing that pipes are so expensive, or I would have thrown mine against the wall dozens of times.
Yeah. That's a good point. I'm having fun imagining the experience from your partner's perspective of like, well, that's his little closet that he goes into. Then I hear a few minutes of yelling and odd noises, occasional silences. Then, 4 or 5 minutes of music, and he comes out like he's been in a sauna,
Yeah, that was absolutely the case.
Yeah. So then, did you ever get a chance to play at a Ren fair? Having, like, kind of returning to the origin. Have you ever had a chance to do that yourself?
No, I haven't. It's something I think I'd really love to do with some kind of a group. I still have in mind those days of the Rogues. I think were influential for a lot of people who wanted to see what piping sort of outside of the kind of traditional military pipe band
Mm-hmm.
mode is like. I think that's something I'd still love to do, but I haven't had a chance to do it yet. And I've also seen, I've seen people playing small pipes at some of those events, and I also play the small pipes, so I'd love to do that at some point too,
Mm.
but not yet.
Are uilleann pipes still something in the back of your mind? Are you still thinking like, someday I'm going to win the lottery and that's going to be the thing? Or have you kind of accepted that you'll be an appreciator, not a player?
No, I still keep that in my mind. I still
Yeah.
maybe every 6 months I'm looking at uilleann pipes online and
Yeah.
thinking maybe
I have that unhealthy
just order
habit
that.
too.
And I've gone to some piping workshops where I've sat in on some of the uilleann pipe classes and just
Mhm.
came away thinking, nope, that bug is still there. It hasn't, like, no matter how much experience I get with them,
Mm-hmm.
but I still haven't managed to. I keep trying to find friends who have them or people who have them and just ask if I can play with them. I haven't had a chance to actually put my hands on a pair.
Yeah. I've talked with some people before who have lamented that like the sort of like military industrial complex that resulted in like, sort of techniques and machinery being applied specifically to like basically mass production of bagpipes, highland bagpipes. We need some kind of like, not that I want conflict and war in the world, right? But we need some kind of collective reason to really push all of society for at least a few years to figure out ways to make uilleann pipes, to make
Yeah.
them more readily available and cheaper and everything.
Closest you get right now is the Fred Morrison pipes, and I don't
Mm-hmm.
I don't know who makes his pipes. I don't think he makes them, but they seem to be fairly standardized, which I've learned is not the case with any other type of uilleann pipes. They're still very much a craft instrument that doesn't play. They're even more cantankerous in a lot of ways than highland pipes.
Right.
So,
Yes. So I've heard. Yeah. Can you believe it? Right. Can you
yeah.
imagine? So then, how does the Dunkirk riots come about? Because I do want us to be able to enjoy some of the music from the Dunkirk riots. In fact, maybe. What do you think? Should you've got those two more recent tracks. We could pick one or do both. We could do one as an opener, one as a closer. I mean, obviously, at some point we should play some Take Back the Power since pipes are so prominent in that track. How would you like those to be sampled in this episode?
Yeah. So I guess if we want to include one of the newer tracks in there, probably some of Digging for Gold, because I think that's the most representative of the sound of the band.
Okay, perfect.
So we can definitely put that in there. And then some Take Back the Power would be a good, because that's so far the only track we've recorded that actually has pipes, which is it's very unfortunate for being on a piping podcast that we don't have more examples of that. But
No, don't worry. That's understandable. So how about we'll plan to go out of the episode on Digging for Gold, because that makes it really easy to kind of like let it play out and really enjoy it,
yeah.
And maybe somewhere in here while we're talking about how you hopped in with the band and what it's like, we'll find a good spot in post that I'll work in some of that Take Back the Power so we can use some of your band.
We don't need to run and hide. We won't be pushed off to the side. What's your plan for tomorrow? Are you a leader? Will you follow? Are you a fighter? Will you cower? It's our time to take back the power. What's your plan for tomorrow? Are you a leader? Will you follow? Are you a fighter? Will you cower? It's our time to take back the power. What's your plan for tomorrow? Are you a leader? Will you follow? Are you a fighter? Will you cower? It's our time to take back the power. It's our time to take back the power. It's our time to take back the power.
So tell me about the band. Did they exist and they recruited you, or did you hear about them, or did you make the band happen? Tell me all about that.
That was another thing that came about. I was with them from the beginning, And I will back up a little bit because there's a couple of steps.
Oh yeah, work us into it for sure. Yeah, don't let me skip
Yeah.
steps for sure.
So I mentioned in there that I'd picked up a banjo along the way.
Yeah.
Which
And suddenly those feel like significant words.
yeah. And I for a little while I'm one of those people who just has to learn new things all the time. And so I started learning a little bluegrass banjo. It was a 5-string banjo. And just playing around for fun. And I again, because it's kind of it's not a difficult instrument per se, but it's a strange instrument.
Yeah.
And so I through the pipe band, the competitive pipe band I was playing with, I'd made connections with other local musicians. One of whom is the accordion player in the Dunkirk Riots, Miles. We'll talk later, but he's also a person who loves to just connect people together. And he had a friend who was who had an Americana band playing a mixture of originals and covers, and needed a banjo player. And so he asked me if I'd be willing to do it. So I joined that band and we played for a while. They were a band that had been around for a long time and then had taken a break during COVID and were trying to get back into it. And we would play oyster festivals and just like county fairs and things like that. But it was a lot of fun. It kind of got me back into the mode of playing with a band, not a pipe band. And remembering how much I just enjoyed that kind of feeling of playing with other people. And so then a little while later, maybe a year or two later, Miles came back to me because he had been in several other bands, and he wanted to start a new project that was sort of a Celtic rock kind of thing. And knew I played the pipes and knew I played the banjo, and had very much in his mind, okay, we can use these two things. And so asked me if I wanted to come in. And so I came along, and again, there were just a couple of us for those initial jam sessions. But he had a few demos that he'd written up for just on the side, for sometimes for other bands that they'd never done, or sometimes just ideas he'd had. And we just started jamming along with those, and got more and more into just the fun of playing a weird collection of instruments, because he's an accordion player, and I was playing pipes and I was playing some banjo, although at the time it was still a 5-string banjo, and just trying to figure out what that meant together.
There's a local artist over here in Utah, Tommy, who he makes it's kind of the idea behind this project of his is like fine art on t-shirts, and so he makes like really beautiful screen printable designs. And he took that famous I think it might be an engraving, I'm pretty sure, famous engraving of the 4 Riders of the Apocalypse. And he worked it so that he calls it the 4 riders of the atonal apocalypse, and the riders instead of being death and pestilence and war and famine or whatever I forget what the riders of the apocalypse are supposed to represent, but instead of those things, they are one of them is playing bagpipes, one has a banjo, one has an accordion, and one just has some drumsticks. My wife bought that shirt from me right away because she was like, "Oh, it's all the instruments you play."
I think I've seen that one because I sent it along to the band and was like, "Oh, look, it's us."
Look at that. So I bet it does make its way through. There's some people like us, man. I bet a lot of the people who are listening to this show right now, of course they have a set of bagpipes, but I bet they also, there's a really high likelihood, really high percentage chance that they also have an accordion and or banjo somewhere in their house. It just seems to go together.
Yeah, absolutely.
Sorry, but sorry, didn't mean to take such a big aside. I just find it so delightful when there's some kind of these are all weird things and yet somehow they converge. It's beautiful. So carry on. The band is forming.
Yeah, so the band is coming together, and we start kind of putting together both Miles tunes and some new stuff, and really coming up with an idea, and we're bringing in other people. Miles definitely had a vision in mind, which was very much in the mode of groups like Flogging Molly and the Dropkick Murphys.
Mm.
And so we were kind of looking for that mix of instruments. So we knew we wanted some kind of a string section. We knew we wanted pipes. We knew we wanted banjo. And then we wanted sort of the standard punk trinity of guitar, bass, drums.
Mm-hmm.
And it took a while before we kind of got the right mix of people. It's, any good musician is already in 2 other bands. And so
Yeah.
it's always hard to find them. Ones
That's
have.
so true.
But it was a really interesting learning experience because, none of the other members of the band had previous experience playing with pipes.
Mm.
I didn't have any experience playing pipes in a rock setting
Yeah.
of any sort. So it definitely took some figuring out in terms of, what keys am I limited to? So when you're writing a tune, if you have in mind that you want pipes in this, just remember I've only got these notes in this order.
Yeah.
And initially it was interesting. Initially the volume of the pipes was certainly an issue. It surprised everybody the first time I struck them up.
And did they say, well, could you turn them down?
Yeah, they
Yeah.
did. There was definitely that point. I don't know if there was a specific turning them down, but there was a point at which I think Miles said, okay, and then you can, at this point, you can cut out and come back in. And I was like, I don't do that.
Right.
Please
Yeah.
don't do that. If I cut out, you're going to need to give me some prep before I come back in. Right.
Right. Yeah.
So there was always that learning experience, and it's been interesting. It's given me that chance to kind of find a mix, because I can say, this is a pipe tune, or this is a banjo tune, or along the way I've added whistle in, so I play some whistle, and really kind of flex that ADHD need to play a dozen instruments, but all in one band.
Right. Yeah. That's so great, man. So then it's just, I don't know if it's the case for everybody, but it makes me smile and chuckle, because I've got a few friends who play pipes in bands, and almost all of them, one of the biggest challenges is figuring out how to lay out all the other instruments on the stage so they can get to them when they switch, instruments from one song to the next.
Yeah, I will. I'll have to maybe include a picture, but I built a custom stand for myself.
Did you
for
really?
the stage, which
Yeah.
is I already had like a multi-instrument stand for hanging. When I was playing with the Americana band, I was playing with both banjo and mandolin, and so I had one of those 2-instrument stands so I could have my mandolin and banjo next to each other.
Mm-hmm.
But I took the top off that and I built a PVC top so it'll hold 2 sets of pipes, and then it still has my banjo hanger on it, and then I got a one of those microphone cup holders to put my whistle in. And so I've got this one stand that holds everything. And
yeah, Tommy, if you get a chance to snap a picture of that, I think there are more than one person in the world would find that useful. Absolutely.
It's and it's a little bit like an octopus in some ways, but it's super handy. But what's really actually been an interesting challenge since we started playing live is now that we're a 7-piece band, I'm at the point where the pipes are actually not loud enough.
Interesting.
Yeah, so I've had to mic the pipes at this point. So I used 2 sets of pipes, and I have a wireless like saxophone mic on both of them, and makes it easier to switch between them. But yeah, we even in the practice room we started to realize like we couldn't hear everything once, because I was the only instrument that wasn't mic'd, and it was getting to the point where they just drowned out. So that's also been a fun challenge, because the sound guy at these places, they just throw up their hands. I don't know what to do. And
yeah, right.
once I tell them, I have a mic on it, I just need to plug in, then they're happy with me. But it's always an interesting experience getting the volume right. I've had to do a lot of learning about what the right level of amplification is.
Yeah. So I'm assuming that mic is trained on the chanter, so you're not worrying too much about mic and drones up.
No, I'm not worried about the drones at this point. They just kind of live as background noise. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
so it's one of the like gooseneck saxophone mics, and I have it taped to the chanter stock and kind of hanging out over the
Oh, I
middle of the
see.
chanter.
Yeah.
Um, I know people who have mic'd up their drones too for
Mm-hmm.
live, but it's a kind of an octopus of chords that you end up with, and
Yeah, sure.
it's not worth it in our case. Um,
So you
so
you have two sets of pipes. Is that because you've got one in B flat and one in A, or what is it? So one when one gets worn out, it's easy to swap, or
no, it's exactly that. It's an A set and a B flat set.
mm,
I use the A set most of the time, just because it covers the range for most of what I need and
mm-hmm.
doesn't require too much sort of retraining by the band about playing in different keys. Right now, I only use the B flat set on Take Back the Power, and
Oh, gotcha.
because that was just in the right key for it.
Mm-hmm.
And so I have the B flat set is actually sort of my original set that I played with the band and solos, but it has a McCallum B flat chanter in it,
Mm-hmm.
and I don't tend to play drones on that just because I've never found a good tuning for the drones that works. There's so much dissonance with the drones on the B flat set and
Mm-hmm.
with the kind of key we're playing in. It just ends up not working. We
Yeah.
actually tried on when we recorded Take Back the Power. We tried it to record the drones, and it just sounded
Hmm.
not right. So those um, I have the reeds shut off on those for playing
Hmm.
live because it's just easier that way. But
Speaking
but
of
yeah,
drones, though, with your songs, I have wondered about this with what other people's experiences. Because personally, I often worry that I might be too accustomed to drones. So I have played with some other musicians before, where like maybe a mandolin player or a guitar player will be like, "Well, we need to do a chord change there. So how are we going to get those drones out of the way?" You know?
right.
And for me, I see what they mean, but it wouldn't have even occurred to me because I'm so accustomed, not just with bagpiping, maybe because of bagpiping, I'm also into other kinds of drone music. And so for me, it's kind of like drones are drones, like drones are gonna drone, you know? And and I think maybe some other musicians are like, no, you can't have that drone keep going when the chord that we're changing to doesn't include that note, you know? Have you ever had that experience where for you, you were like, it's fine, it's just a drone, and other musicians were like, no, that's not fine, it's not going to be okay.
Yeah, I think it's definitely a cultural thing.
Yeah.
I, I do remember, I don't remember where now, but I remember reading about this, which is, obviously, yeah, we're used to the drone in the background. We're used to even our own chanters. There's
Mm.
certain notes we play that are purposefully quite dissonant against the drones,
Yeah.
and that's part of the sound.
Yeah.
But it was something to work with on the band. Now, in this particular case, as I mentioned previously, because the band is so loud, once we all get going, those drones really fade to the
Mm.
background.
Yeah.
So it's not so much an issue. We have one or two songs we do where I have kind of solo parts, and then the drones are there, but there's really not that much going on, so it's not an issue. If I was playing them in more of a folk setting, and I know this is a case with like the small pipes, for instance, if I'm playing them at a session, you have to think a little bit more about what drones you keep on, depending on the key
Mm.
of the tune and things like that. But for punk music, it doesn't really matter that much.
Yeah.
So it just kind of adds to the general chaos of the
The
sound.
chaos. Yeah. So what have any other sort of like learning experiences come up? Because I don't think you could get too detailed for me and for anybody listening in where whether we've tried it or we're just curious about it, like what are the challenges of like do, how do you keep your pipes in tune for a set, for example? Like if you're going to do a 90-minute set with the band and you're not going to have Take Back the Power till 40 minutes in, do you just cross your fingers every time, or have you found a good way to make it so your pipes are ready to go?
Yeah, It is a challenge. It's so generally speaking, it's got to be the latter. I've seen other bands where I know the piper sort of strategically sneaks off stage and goes to a green room or something to tune
Yeah.
on tracks where they're not playing. But in my case, I'm pretty much playing all the time, and so I can warm up ahead of time, and then I've just got to hope it stays close enough to in tune that I that it's not an issue.
Yeah.
Now, again, this is something that sort of being in a more punk oriented band, being slightly out of tune isn't really that much of an issue. You
Sure,
want
yeah.
to you want to be in tune, but you don't need to be perfect. This is not it's not a really finely crafted folk tune. It's quite a loud, aggressive sound, and so a little bit of offness it just kind of adds to the ambiance of there being pipes.
Yeah.
But yeah, if it gets really wildly out of tune, it can be an issue. Fortunately, that hasn't happened yet. I imagine, as we play longer and longer sets, that might become an issue. Especially because right now, at least, I'm playing fairly easy reads on stage, just because I don't really want to be blowing myself out halfway through. So I'm playing Shepherd B flat reads in both the chanters, and they're called a medium, but they don't feel like a medium. Maybe that's just too long playing in a pipe band.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, that's exactly right. You've been exposed to the 2x4s for too long.
Yeah, but they tend to stay reasonable in tune enough, I would say.
Yeah.
For a set. Take Back the Power is an issue because I only play that once, and it tends to be towards the end of the set. But it works most of the time. I haven't heard any bad live recordings that I'm too worried about.
Yeah. Well,
I did
you
actually
mentioned- Oh, go ahead.
Good. On that front, before we recorded the first time, I happened to be at a workshop, a piping workshop, and there were two pipers I respected there, one small/big piper and one uilleann piper, who had both recorded albums. And so I did get advice from them on recording big pipes in the studio. And one of the things they brought up was warming up in the studio for a good amount of time, because studios, because they're sealed and soundproof, they also tend to be quite dry. And so you really need to work hard to get your pipes settled in that environment. But fortunately, then once I start doing that, I'm only playing for a couple minutes, and those guys were playing whole albums, so they had a lot more to worry about.
Yeah. So that's a good hot tip for anybody trying this. If possible, warm up in the space you'll be performing or recording in.
Yeah. The second really good piece of advice they gave me is to record the drones separately from the chanter, and that's because their good point was, one, it's really hard to cut together two pieces of drones. They're never going to match up. And it's really hard to keep drones perfectly in tune over the course of a 3 to 5 minute set. And especially if you're playing your chanter and trying to pay attention to keeping the chanter in tune. So they went back and re-recorded the drone tracks as totally separate tracks. Which they said was also a really good challenge, because having to just sit and keep steady drones for 3 minutes straight, I'm sure anybody who's played in kind of competitive fields will recognize as a really good training exercise. Just having to listen to your drones with no chanter and keep them steady for 3 minutes is a challenge.
I've heard before that it's similarly really difficult for a percussionist, for example, to keep a simple groove, like it just like a quarter note 4-beat stomp going for 3-5 minutes, a long time. There's something, I don't know. I wonder if it's kind of like when you repeat a word too many times, it starts to sound weird and it starts to not make sense. And then you start kind of wondering what life is really. It's like you make yourself do this one thing for too long, you just start going a little bit crazy.
Yeah. It's once you get into that monotony of playing, then you start to forget what you were even doing.
Right. Yeah. How did I get here? Just droning and droning. So then the band is it whereabouts are you exactly, you guys? Like, what are you looking for, local shows all the time, or are you traveling?
Right now we're playing mostly locally. We've got some
Mhm.
leads on some distant plays. So we're based in Norfolk, Virginia, which is in the southeastern corner of Virginia,
Mhm.
right on the coast. And we've been playing local at you know breweries and festivals, and um, put on a couple shows of our own. But we're trying to expand out. We want to travel some. We want to play distance shows. We want to play with other groups. So we're always trying to book new shows and get build relationships with other bands. So
Mhm.
absolutely, always looking for new opportunities.
It's a cool name, Dunkirk Riots. Is the whole story behind it just that it sounds cool? Because if it is, that's fine. But if not, is there a story behind the name?
It's a little bit of that. So it's when we were looking for a name, we kicked around a whole lot of ideas, as you do.
Mhm.
But the house we practice at is on Dunkirk Avenue,
Oh.
and so that was where the Dunkirk part of it came from. Although we've had a lot of conversations about, because obviously Dunkirk is a famous city in France where
Mhm.
a very important part of World War II happened, and
Mhm.
or World War One.
I
Yeah.
was just about to say, don't worry about it, because I was about to say one of those world wars, because I was trying real hard to remember which one. So don't worry, don't worry about not being sure. I'm not sure.
So we were a little bit, I wouldn't say worried, but we were interested if people would try and make that connection, because especially a lot
Sure.
of bands in the Celtic space have some historically oriented name or something like
Yeah.
that. But we decided, it's fine, and just because we're not a French band doesn't mean we can't have a name of a French town.
Yeah,
And
that's right.
also, in my defense, it was in Scots or in Gaelic. Dunkirk means hill church,
Oh,
or
there you
church
go.
on the hill. Um, so there's sort of a Celtic connection there if you want to stretch it a bit.
Mhm.
Um, the riots part mostly because it sounds cool, and because I feel like, riot can have a couple of meanings. Obviously, riot can mean like a violence,
Yeah.
which has its, but also just means noise.
Yeah.
And so in my mind, it was sort of like Dunkirk Riot or the Dunkirk Riots, sort of like we're just this noisy band,
Whole bunch of noise
kind
on
of fit.
Dunkirk Avenue.
Yeah, exactly. Um, and I will admit I borrowed it a little bit, the general concept of it from one of my favorite bands in the Celtic space is a group called Enter the Haggis. I don't know if you're
Oh
familiar
yeah, I've
with
heard that
them,
band. Yeah.
who unfortunately are just about to call it quits. They've been playing and touring for around 30 years now, and they've just
Mm.
decided they're on their final tour right now, which they've cleverly called Exit the Haggis.
That is
Um,
clever. I like that.
but they ran into an issue that bands do where, so their name started out as kind of a joke, obviously, like Enter the Dragon
Sure.
from Bruce Lee, and they were sort of a party band. And then as they became a more serious band, it was sort of like what I call the Foo Fighters conundrum.
Yeah.
They realized they had this name that just didn't quite fit who they were.
Yeah.
So for a couple of years, they tried to change their name to Jubilee Riots, which was actually a reference to a specific historic event in Canada, which is where they're
Mm.
from. And it didn't stick because everybody already knew them as Enter the Haggis. Had loved them so much that they eventually changed it back. But I really liked the structure of that name,
Mm.
and so I borrowed a bit of the idea of the structure from that.
Well, it's cool that we could even look at this as a sort of homage to another great band that you
Yeah.
like. Yeah, I did. I mean, I've never heard Jubilee Riot, so I understand. I mean, Enter the Haggis it really sticks. It's got sticking power, so I can imagine that would have been a real challenge to try to change that for sure.
Yeah.
So, do you have other projects, or is that kind of like your main focus right now? Is getting that band out to more shows and getting more recordings down?
Yeah, that's the main focus. I'm also I've been involved in the local kind of session scene for a couple of
Oh
years,
yeah.
just going out and playing in sessions, and I've been doing more of that. So, uh, my wife and I, she plays the fiddle, and we've been running for a while a slow session here to try and get people more used to just playing in sessions at session
Hmm.
speed. And so we are always trying to push and grow that. We just moved it out of our house finally and into a local coffee shop that already hosts another session. Um, and And I've been trying to just beef up my chops, playing session tunes, both Irish traditional tunes and Scottish tunes on the banjo and the small pipes, and really trying to kind of build out that side of my knowledge. So I've got a little bit more kind of traditional basis, because I love that atmosphere. I love a good session. So always seeking those out. But my main kind of, again, using air quotes, professional focus is definitely on Dunkirk Riots and trying to grow that band and make them as successful as possible.
Yeah. I've only kind of gone to sessions before, like a couple times. Only kind of, and they were only kind of like after a workshop kind of thing. I'm intimidated. What if you had advice for your fellow pipers who I think a lot of us are interested, like, oh, I have a low D whistle, maybe I could take it to the session, like how should we approach that?
Yeah, so there's a couple of strategies. One is there's nothing wrong with just going and sitting and listening. If it's in a pub or what have you, you can just sit and listen. And that's a good way of learning what tunes they play. Because one of the interesting things about sessions is that there tend to be favorite tunes that are played, but it tends to be different regionally. So you're going to hear different tunes at your session than you do at a session a state away or the next town over, or certainly in another country. And that can be a good way of just learning what tunes get played so you can practice them on your own. Two, there is, it's always useful to look for what's called a slow session, which is what I mentioned earlier, that my wife and I run. And those are sessions specifically designed for giving people an entry point. So what that means is they tend to go obviously slower, at a slower pace, because typical session speed is quite brisk. They let you use sheet music, or I shouldn't say let you, but you don't get looked down on for using sheet music, and you might at some sessions, at some regular sessions. So if you don't have the tunes memorized, you can read off the sheet. Sometimes they publish the tunes that they play ahead of time. We do that into pre-designed sets, so you can kind of, again, practice before you go. So that's a really great place to start. And then there are lots of online sessions you can look at to where you can join in, and sometimes it's like a Zoom, sometimes it's just a video recording that's designed for you to play along with. But in the Zoom sessions, basically everybody except for the lead musician is muted, and you can just kind of play along at home, play the home game, so to speak. An interesting experience that's coming up soon, well, depending on when this podcast goes out, but these happen a couple times a year. There's a Scottish group called Dive. It's DAI.
Spelled funny, isn't it? Right.
MH. Yeah. And they do these events mainly on the West Coast. So for West Coast listeners of the US, you might find them there, but they're doing their first one on the East Coast in March of 2025, called Camp Dive, and they're basically like a little mini session camp that's focused on getting comfortable with playing at sessions. So I'm actually going to be attending that one, the one that's on the East Coast. It's in Vermont, in the first weekend of March. And so they have sessions that teach you about playing in a session, or workshops that teach you about playing in a session. And then
I like it the other way. Sessions about sessions. I'm into that.
Sessions about sessions. Yeah. And then sessions in the evening, and also just a chance to kind of hang out with the band and play along with them. So there's great things like that. There's other workshops around. I mainly know the ones on the East Coast, but there's instrument specific ones on the East Coast for the pipes. There's general ones like on the East Coast. Again, we have Swannanoa, which is in North Carolina. That's really great, mainly focused on kind of Irish traditional music, though there's a good sized kind of Scottish focus. They have people that teach classes in small pipes, whistle, banjo, flute, any instrument you can think. And then there's sessions every night, including slow sessions. So those are good chances to just get out there and learn or play along in a kind of a safer atmosphere. But just really getting out there and doing it is the best thing, and collecting tunes is and practice those tunes at home and then be prepared when you go to the session. Another thing I'll say is, if you're playing, whistle is a little bit different if you play a whistle or something like that, because they tend to be a bit louder. But if you're playing, say, small pipes, they're almost certainly going to be drowned out in a normal size session. So it's easier for you to kind of play along and not worry too much about making mistakes there. So
that is the opposite experience that most of us will have had otherwise as pipers. Maybe it'd be a lot of fun to blend in,
Yeah.
Or to fly under the radar, rather, something like that. Well then, Tommy, could you just tell me maybe a little bit about, is there anything to say about digging for gold, or should we just slide into it?
Yeah, it's very much in that vein people will be familiar with in sort of Celtic rock. Who've listened to bands like the Dropkick Murphys and Foggy Molly. It's a fun tune. Unfortunately, no pipes in it, but it does get a little bit of a banjo love, and that's kind of my contribution to it. So we've just put in the order to have a 7-inch printed with Digging for Gold and the other new track on it. But we don't yet know exactly when it's going to come out, so I'll keep you aware of that as...
perfect. Whenever that comes out, I will make sure that there are links to the Dunkirk Riots website and Bandcamp in the show notes below. So following the band on Bandcamp and anywhere else on the internet will make absolutely sure you know when those 7-inchers are pressed and ready to go, and other fun stuff in future too, of course.
Great, thank you.